Hello? Yeah, all right. This is recording. I wanted to do just a quick video on something interesting. I like to occasionally look at Google Earth for a couple hours, every now and then, just kind of look around, see what I can find. And I was looking at something super interesting just the other day. Actually, this was a couple months ago, where I was kind of charting potential Viking routes and, why is it that we have evidence of early Viking settlements in Canada and kind of along the coast? And why did it take so long for the Spaniards and the French and the British to actually make their way to, um, yeah, North America? And straight away, if you look at the globe, right, if you're living in Norway and your goal is to travel in one direction to the west, it's say in one straight line. You don't know the earth is round or flat. You don't know what it is. If you just go in a straight line, I mean, look, you can just hop on over even from here to there along the coast there, and you're already in Canada. There isn't, the longest distance that they have to travel. Oops, I forgot to use this. There. 1,000 kilometers by ship. I mean, if they really wanted to, that's not unreasonable, you know? So, from Norway, where the majority of the Viking population was, towards the end of the Viking era, we saw roughly 50% of the Viking population was living in Finland and Sweden, and 50 inside Norway. So we find an equal number of Viking sites in both Finland and Sweden, roughly. And then we see double or triple that in Norway, and then we see some more, for example, some sites in Denmark, Estonia, and the later epochs of Viking era. We'll see sort of a distribution of equipment and artifacts sort of along the coast here of this area. And then I guess they sort of change from Vikings into something else after that. But then if we go over to England and you're trying to find this new land, say there's myths and stories of, um, Vikings going over to some magical place and you're living here, if you go in a straight line from, say, London out here, you have to travel a pretty long way before you hit something which is going to be the Caribbeans. All right, it's going to be like Central America. You even, if you're traveling from France, you're going to have to turn. You're going to have to go with this curvature of the planet in order to end up here. If you're from Spain and you're trying to get to, you know, somewhere in North America, it's not as easy as just traveling west, directly perpendicular to the north axis. You can't just, you're gonna have to be super careful with how you travel because if you screw up, you're gonna get lost here. You have to travel like here, from here to there. And that's 4,000 kilometers or 6,000 kilometers or 7,000 kilometers. Like you got to have a bit of a problem from Spain unless you absolutely know what you're doing, unless you have developed navigation tools, or you have maps, or you're traveling north to Norway and from Norway hopping over to Canada. So, it's the same with France. And what's interesting is when we look at the distribution of these European settlers in North America, well, I mean, we can start all the way from the Viking era, which is along here. Then we have the French and the British, which is kind of here. And then we have the Spanish, which is kind of here and there. And when we look at their navigation paths say just in terms of like driving in a straight line, of floating, of sailing in a straight line, we see that it kind of corresponds with the alignment of where these countries are in Europe. So we got Scandinavia, France, England, Spain, and directly in a straight line west, we see roughly where they actually settled. Um, Now, that's not to say it's one straight route from Spain. I mean, you do have a lot of places here along the way, a lot of islands that you can stop at. Uh, but I think overall it's kind of interesting because the worst way to kind of look at this situation is to look at it from a flat, two-dimensional map, because those two-dimensional maps, they don't really give you the full answer. When you have a globe, things start to really make a lot more sense in terms of migrational patterns of humans across history. A lot of, the Vikings didn't necessarily have advanced navigational tools like they did, five, six, 700 years later, in England and France and Spain. The invention of the latitude, for example, and I'm not entirely sure about this, but it wasn't until those tools were developed uh, that these Central European states were actually capable of finding their way around the Atlantic. Because think about how much resources you need to traverse in a straight line from France, like without getting lost, without screwing up everything. I mean, it's kind of a scary. Imagine going, 7,000 kilometers across the ocean just to reach, North America. I mean, those people who were on those ships, man, that's some scary stuff. Like, think about the early European settlers that arrived in South America, you know, the Spaniards. I mean, I'm guessing what they did is they traveled, they probably did something like this, maybe. That would be the safest route. You couldn't really like just go, whoop, okay. But maybe they could at that time. Maybe they had the technology capable of doing that. You have a large galleon with 20, 30 cattle on board, you know, and you can always stop somewhere here. Oops. You can always stop somewhere here or there to refurbish your. Here's another way you could do it. You could probably go from over here. That might be another safe way to do it. But going straight across is a recipe for disaster. Going straight across here. So London, like England, France, Spain, they were sort of a disadvantage because in some eras, they were enemies, some era allies. Could they have traveled north? Were there threats north? It's maybe they just didn't like the cold, frozen Arctic conditions. But when we look at just the Vikings alone, I mean, it was a breeze for them. Their entire coastline lines up perfectly with the north of Canada. I mean, look how easy it was for the Viking population for hundreds of years to make their way across the Atlantic to North America and Canada. I mean, this is a breeze, and not only that, they're used to the cold. And the people they're gonna meet in North America and Canada are people with similar skills and similar interests and similar tools and similar, all of that as they have locally. Maybe they don't have iron and steel and so forth. It's gonna be these native, longhouse um, Americans, but the Vikings had longhouses too. So they probably had a lot of similarities. And just look like the distance from where is that ruler? The distance from here, that's only 1,000 kilometers. The distance from, and if I understand correctly, you don't really want to go with your boat out in open sea. You want to stay close to coastlines because that's where you're. See, 500 kilometers. I mean, you could do that. That's not. You could do that like pretty quick. That's not terrible distance on a boat, and you can shorten it dramatically. And the thing is, if you look at this path here, right? From I just marked central, random central Norway. You go right across and then you just follow the coastline. You don't really have to go over open sea. You can stop anytime you want for, to let your cattle graze, to go hunting and get resources. So the Vikings didn't need large galleons to get across to North America, unlike, France and England and Spain, where, just the first step in getting to North America, like just imagine how difficult it is to go from, to land here. Because if you just go direct straight line, you're still stuck out here. Meanwhile, Canada is passing by. You're entering America from the north, even though you're traveling west. Like if you were to think in terms of straight lines, right? If you go straight north of America, that's Norway. If you go, I mean, it's beyond north, but if you just go in a straight line directly north from America's Canada, you're gonna hit Norway, and you're gonna, along the way, go through all this land. And the funny thing is, this was at a time when Greenland was actually green. So there was the Viking warm age. So there was a lot less snow in Greenland, and they could actually farm and do all sorts of stuff there. So, but then, the same thing can't really be said for England. England has a pretty decent chance. But again, like if you want to safely make it to North America, you don't really have a choice, especially if you're embarking from here. You kind of have to go here, there, 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 there. You see, and then you're already hitting land. That's the safest, easiest, least resource intensive, mentally most, um, mentally like the easiest way to get from London to North America. And you might even like screw this. Might even go down through the Great Lakes here. So until you find, I mean, this is the secret to getting to North America, really, unless you have navigational tools, which were developed much later than the Vikings. Spain, again, we can draw that out, that path. Uh, in Portugal, for example, as well. The safest way would be to go along the coast, and then from here, clutch your balls and hope for the best, and then boom. Oops. But, in order to do that kind of traveling, you kind of have to have already mapped out certain areas, and you have to be pretty confident that if you go somewhere, something exists. You can't just like guess your way along the entire African coast and then just, oh, this is where we go across the Atlantic and just hop on over if you have no idea what's there. Um, and that's probably in some ways why these Central American, this Caribbean was so valuable, why there was so much gold and so much trade going from there, because you could so easily traverse, um, you know, along the entire coastline back to, Holland. So this entire Central American zone was definitely, where all the pirates were. You probably had the vast majority of all the shipping going on, and the trade routes were going through there. And then not just that, but you also got all the trade routes going across here, here, here. So all of this was just must have been an incredible trading area. And historically, a lot of what we hear from the New World and a lot of the gold and a lot of the interesting Wild West stories are sort of in these areas here. and the trade. And so you probably had all the mining going on in the mountains here, and then you got the shipping starting from there, and then it goes up and about. But I thought I'd just do this video because I wanted to do it for a while, and this people always talk about, oh, how the Vikings got to, um, oh, the Vikings were in Canada 1,000 years before, you know, the early European settlers, and but if you look at it from the perspective of a globe and you draw out reasonable routes, you actually notice very quickly that it makes a lot of sense that the Norway has the most reasonable, safest. I mean, look, here's the north route. You can basically walk all the way to North America. I mean, it depends how deglaciated and how uniced it was, because their ice somewhere, I don't remember if it was around here, that's like 2 million years old at the base. So, but there was significantly less ice during the Viking Age. You just take your boat, you go from here, you go here. Oh, and basically from here onwards, you can just, walk the whole way. I mean, this doesn't look like the safest, you know, most food-rich environment. Maybe you had seals or something, or eat penguins. But even the Rus, even the Russians, I mean, it's kind of an interesting area of the world here. It's very, very interesting in terms of routes. But we know that there are in Greenland dozens and dozens of Viking sites. We have found some evidence of Viking heritage in Canada and North America. And I'm sure that at some point in time, especially when the ice starts to melt and we go back into like a warmer period that was very similar to the Viking Age, we'll probably find a lot of Viking artifacts along here, along here, along here, there, all around Greenland. We know in Iceland and here. And it's not just there, but look, there's little islands too in between. So very interesting. It's kind of a new way to look at it from our perspective because in schools or whatnot, we're never really, it's never really discussed like from a navigational perspective. We don't see it like this ever, and it's kind of weird, you're 20 years after middle school or high school and discussing all these things, and it was never really, it was just sort of randomly talked about, but we didn't actually go into it in this kind of detail where it starts to make sense, right? Like, look how difficult it actually is for the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the French, the British, the Dutch. Look how difficult it is for them to actually make it to North America. If you didn't know this place existed, and for a long time, they thought, oh, this doesn't exist. This is just all water. You go in this direction, you end up from the other side in India. Well, it kind of makes sense because if you go out here and you're lost at sea, you know, you can go a couple thousand kilometers where there's land everywhere around you, but you're still out in open sea. You're gonna get screwed. Like no wonder they probably had loads and loads of people get lost out here trying to find their way and not really ever and just sinking because they just ran out of resources. There was no wind. Like you had to be super careful. And how long did it take before people started figuring out, oh, okay, we got to go this way. Oh, okay, we got to go this way. And going across is actually the dangerous route. Because at some point, if you go from France out here, you have to go and make a turn. You have to like turn up. So from here to there is your shortest distance across, but it's not safe to go across here because you never know when the winds die and you don't have any wind and now you're stuck out here and this, don't really want that to happen. The strongest winds from what I understand are along the coastlines. And so these kind of central open ocean areas, I don't know, I don't that's just a memory from I don't know where. But yeah, that's it, guys. I thought that was a pretty interesting video, and I'd strongly recommend, if you're ever bored, just opening up Google Earth, and just staring at it for a while, because you can always find like pretty interesting stuff. I've been counting craters, asteroid craters. You can even see, for example, like, these flooding zones, right? This has been talked about a lot. So you can see even like ripples from when the Mediterranean floods, which, here you can see as well, but all this kind of stuff. So you can actually play around with this for a long time and just, it's very, very interesting and get to learn sort of where things are on the planet and things like this, which is super interesting. So I'll catch you guys later.